In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, who came to us in the person of Master Farad Muhammad, to whom praise is due forever. And we eternally thank Allah for raising among us the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and thank both of them for raising and giving us an example in our current dire strait, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And it is their name that I greet you, brothers and sisters, in the nations and our people's greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Saviours Day in the beautiful city of Detroit, the Mecca for our nation of Islam, where Master Farad Muhammad found the Christ, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in our beloved city. So I hope you're being treated well and enjoying Saviours Day thus far. I appreciate getting an opportunity to share a few things as provided by our sister Deborah, who organized this entire workshop and is spearheading an effort to continue to grow our Ministry of Education into the future. I wanted to just share a few thoughts on the development of the ministry, but I wanted to start with the current context, because we are taught to look at past, present, and future in perfect tense. The educational system that we are experiencing in the United States is on its deathbed. And that should be alarming for a couple of reasons. Number one, many of our children are caught in this current system. And number two, we haven't developed a plausible alternative to what we have. So the Quran teaches us about the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The dreadful is already here, but we have not moved expeditiously to produce the great, the new world. And it's going to take efforts by all of us to make that happen. So I wanted to kind of start with the history of our current system, the United States system of education, where it sits currently, and then the need to develop a Ministry of Education for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and for our future. The American educational system is actually a relatively new system. We can trace its genesis to the mid to late 1800s. The American system of education was mainly private until around 1850, 1860. Very few Americans were formally educated. One that they didn't learn, but this thing we call schooling and public schooling is relatively new. Most people got their education in a one-room schoolhouse that was mined by a volunteer. Where people would go to school to about fourth or fifth grade, and then most of their life they'd spend in an apprenticeship learning to do whatever they were going to do, whether it was a blacksmith or farmer or carpenter. They learned in the field. This thing we call the public school system did not really emerge until the mid 1850s, and it was a response to the great European migration. Millions of European immigrants were fleeing countries like Ireland, Poland, Italy, and they were coming to the eastern seaboard of the United States. And at that time, formal schooling was private for most people, and they couldn't afford it. So Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Polish immigrants, German immigrants, they were tearing up New York City. They were tearing up Newark. They were tearing up Boston. They were tearing up Baltimore, Maryland. And the society at large, white society, decided that we needed a place to socialize our new relatives who have come to us from Europe into what was known as Americanism. So it was the first known socialized system where people, all of the citizens agreed that educating these children was so important to the nation's future that they dug into their pockets and paid into a general pot to educate children, many of whom weren't their own, and start to make K-12 education compulsory. It was a place to teach them English, teach them American values, teach them certain mathematical and literacy skills, writing skills, but also to teach them to be marketable and to contribute to the economy. And that system has grown over the course of the last 140, 150 years into what it is today. And currently, that system, which evolved into providing access to the industrial revolution, providing access into STEM and other fields, is currently on a very rapid decline. And I'd like to just give you some data on that decline, and it's worse for us. Over the past 10 years, 20 years in general, been a very deep decline in the development or the influence of the American public school system, which at one time was the envy of the world. America was one of the first countries to make education accessible to the common man. And it led to a lot of innovation, a lot of growth in industry and business and technology, what's currently on a very rapid decline. The passing of a law called No Child Left Behind in 2001 shifted the focus in American schools from access and equity to competition and redlining and resegregation, using standardized test scores as the bellwether of school success. A test developed on certain norms that middle-class white communities, their children will be more prepared for. It assesses skills that they've been socialized in since they were young children. And creating a justification to vilify certain systems in cities like Chicago, Detroit, Memphis, Dallas, where children who weren't socialized in these norms of academic English, compliance to Western European norms, and they use that assessment to create accountability standards or ratings, where schools would get rated on their effectiveness on this one test to create kind of a new Jim Crow system. Because you could no longer say colored and white, but you could say A district, progressive district, exemplary district, failing district. And they started to distribute these scarlet letters to different districts based upon their performance on one standardized test. And what that did was, as a result of that, it justified a level of sanction to certain systems that affected the quality of life in the entire environment. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York in 2014 did a comprehensive study of American housing values. And housing values are calculated the two most influential factors in calculating a home's value: the racial homogeneity of the city or the community, and the accountability scores of the local school district. The 80-20 rule, that as soon as the minority population or non-white population reaches a level of 20% or more, there's a sliding calculation for home values for every percentage over 20%. So a community can take up to a 20% non-white presence, and after that there's a sliding value. The second calculation, the second most important, which collectively makes up 65%, is the local school's accountability rating, which they knew would disproportionately affect communities of color. So No Child Left Behind was really a slick redistribution of real estate wealth. It was a way to put dog whistles on certain communities to justify raising property values, which then increases the equity in people's homes, which increases their wealth. It resegregated schools, where now we have a more segregated system in 2020 than we did before Brown versus Board of Education. That label of failing then justified reducing funding, making schools vulnerable to being taken over by charters, and even the recruitment of charters in those communities. To add on top of that, consulting contracts, making school improvement a big business, where they would give funds, but it could only go to certain people. That's led to fewer people going into education as a profession. We've seen a tremendous drop in new teacher recruitment into our profession and new teachers entering the profession since 2011. Number one, only 21 of America's 50 states have restored funding to pre-recession levels. That means 29 states are funding schools at a level that they did before 2008. Number two, we've seen a tremendous drop in teacher certification. In states like Michigan, 71% drop since 2010-11, and that's statewide. We start looking at districts like Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, Grand Rapids. The percentages are even scarier. So the schools that our children go to, the funding has been cut. Many of them are staffed with long-term substitute teachers. They carry the scarlet letter of failing. And then they're surrounded by choice schools, which in some cases are better, in some cases are not better, where that pot of money has been divided up. I say all that to say, brothers and sisters, we're in a crisis. And Allah is forcing us to create a system for ourselves. The American public school system is not dying for our children, it's dead. The evidence is just clear. So I'm encouraging all of us to get deeply engaged, not just at Saviours Day, but in a continuous dialogue and work to build a ministry of education, which at the foundation is Muhammad University of Islam, and other aspects that Sister Deborah has organized around fully educating our nation. That process of creating institutions has several steps, and you're going to get involved in some of those steps today. Number one is being clear about purpose. Why do we need an education system? We call those the pillars of a system. We call it shared mission, shared vision, shared values, and shared goals. Why do we exist? What are we trying to do together? What do we value? And what are our incremental goals for improvement? We have to move beyond talking. We have to meet, we have to plan, we have to execute in the short term, the midterm, and the long term. Our children are dying in the current system, and we have to start to produce it more than just 2 hours at Saviours Day. Once we're clear on our purpose, our direction, our goals, our plans, we create a blueprint. Then it's about galvanizing resources to produce that blueprint. And those resources include financial, material, and human. School systems and systems of education don't build themselves. We need technology, we need qualified people, we need resources to pay people a living wage. You don't build a system on volunteerism. Every nation in the world has an education system. And if we're a nation, we have to build it and we have to sacrifice and to fund it. Step 3, creating an infrastructure where there are systems produced, local systems, regional systems, national systems. And then finally, once those systems, which are properly funded and well-resourced, are executed, it's about monitoring the progress to make sure that our systems don't regress, but we're growing towards the system that we said we wanted to produce. As the minister has reminded us many times over, brothers and sisters, we can do this, but not at the current trajectory that we've been going. This is life or death for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. As the minister has said, we don't want to pass on the legacy of disorganization and cowardice to another generation. We have the capacity to build a great nation that our lineage will thank us for hundreds and thousands of years down the line. But as the Quran teaches us, everything starts as a clot, and Allah develops us stage by stage. So I'm asking all of us who are listening to this to commit to the process, to be deeply engaged, to set aside sport and play, to set aside distractions, and let's work together to build a ministry of education for our children. May Allah bless you. Inshallah, I'll be able to see many of you face to face Saturday and Sunday. And let's work cheerfully and fear not. Assalamu alaikum.